So when we think of governance in this country, the first thing that we think about is the majestic Raisina Hill and the North Block and the South Block. That's the seat of the government. The Prime Minister's office is there. The office of the Ministry of Defense, Finance, External Affairs, Home Affairs, that National Security Advisor, the Cabinet Secretary, all of them sit there. But if you look to a little of the right to these buildings, this is what you get. You get the institution of Parliament. And the institution of Parliament plays an extremely important role in shaping governance, in shaping the future of this country. The only problem currently with the institution of Parliament is while the country has progressed in the last 65 years, not much has changed when it comes to the institution of Parliament. Let me start with a very simple thing. Let me start with the money part. So, the budget of the Government of India, the Union of India, is about 21 lakh crores. It has about 100, different departments and ministries. And the responsibility of Parliament is to, one, pass this budget of 20 lakh crores, and the second is to keep, an eagle eye out on the working of these different ministries and departments to see that, the machinery of the Government of India is working smoothly. Now, if you were to see the resources that Parliament has, to do this, and the reason I'm using these numbers is to point out the complexity and the enormity of the problems. And the resources that Parliament has to do this is about 1,000 crores. Right? So that's the budget. The entire budget of the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha combined is about 1,000 crores. And they use this budget, to keep the Government of India in check, to make laws on a variety of subjects, and essentially make sure that the country is on the right path, policy-wise, legislation-wise. Let me put this number in context. That's about less than about 0.5%, or even lesser than 0.5% of our budget. And to put this number into context, lesser money to Parliament means that Parliament has certain basic needs. Less money means Parliament is not able to fulfill those needs. What is the basic need? All of us need it. We need enough quantity, we need high quality, and we need it all the time. For an institution like Parliament, the equivalent of water is research. After all, Parliament has to pass a budget. It makes laws on complex subjects, right? So one day it could be nuclear energy, second day it could be maternity benefit, the third day it could be disability rights. More recently, the IIM bill. So it's doing complex stuff. It's doing technical stuff. It's doing voluminous stuff. If you, last year, when I was going through the budget documents, it's about 1,100 pages. The union budget is about 1,100 pages of nothing but tables and tables of numbers. And a member of Parliament has to go through this, and make sure that the ministries are working properly. The basic need of research of Parliament is so understaffed. Only about 8% of Parliament staff actually works on research. Everything else is either one kind of an administrative or another kind of an administrative activity. Members of Parliament, don't get, leave alone a research team, they don't even get a research staff. So essentially it's a member of Parliament, trying to discharge his duties by, Google searching things and reading opinion columns from a Hindu or an Express or a Business Standard. I'm not too sure if that's the kind of future that we want where our policies are made based on a Google algorithm and search results. I want to compare this, since everything has to have context, I want to compare this to the US Congress. Right? In 2010, the US Congress had a budget of about $5 billion. Right? They need every cent of that now to keep their current president in check, but that's their budget. In addition to the $5 billion that the US Congress has, each of its senators and congressmen is allowed to hire a staff of 15 to 20 people to help with research. In addition to that, the Library of Congress has something called the Congressional Research Service. That is about 600 analysts, lawyers, professionals who help the members of Congress on research and key issues. And to top that off, there's something called the Congressional Budget Office. The Congressional Budget Office is about another 300 people, accountants, finance professionals, econ majors, who are number crunching on the US government's budget and to say as to how the numbers are looking. In India, we have about 170 people within the Parliament Library who do this job. And the most that they can do at times is pull out newspaper clippings, right, when they're asked about a particular subject. So that's, when we are rethinking a better tomorrow, we need to think about the fact as to how do we equip our Parliament to meet some of its basic research needs. But money is not the only problem, that our Parliament has. Our Parliament has a couple of different structural issues. I'm going to talk about, one of them, which is very current, which relates to the anti-defection law. If you noticed, a couple of weeks ago, in one part of the country, a section of the MLAs were put onto a bus, taken to a resort, because they were supposed to vote on a confidence motion in their legislative assembly. That's not a new occurrence in our country. Every time there's a confidence vote, where you're unsure of the numbers, be it Uttarakhand, be it Nagaland, our MLAs get a forced vacation. They can't use their phones, but they get to stay in a nice resort, 3 days to ensure their loyalty. And the reason that happens is because of the anti-defection law. The anti-defection law was passed in 1985. What it basically means is that if you win an election on a particular party's ticket, you have to vote for that party in the House. What it also does is, it basically reduces our MPs and MLAs to sheep, right? They can be herded over, and their opinion doesn't really count. What I meant by herded over is, if there is a debate in Parliament, and a member of Parliament has a differing view, from his political party, he or she does not have a choice to vote differently from his party. What that does is, it means that the government or the Prime Minister and his ministers do not have to negotiate and build a consensus with individual members of Parliament. All they can do is find a leader of a particular political group, convince him or her of the merit of their idea, and that idea saves the Parliament. And that, just kills the basic concept of a deliberative democracy that we have. So all that research that I just talked about is not going to be, any use to any member of Parliament if they can't vote according to their conscience. But there are solutions to this, and these solutions come from within Parliament itself. The idea of the anti-defection law was to make sure that governments were not destabilized. So a number of people have said that why not keep the anti-defection law only when the stability or the continuance of a government is in question. Every other time, when it's a simple debate or a bill, members of parliament and MLAs should be allowed to vote according to their free conscience. Happens in every other country in the world. The last part of what I wanted to talk about was, debate in our country when it comes to the institution of parliament is very limited in scale. I'll take two examples. The first example is whenever a legislative assembly gets disrupted or when parliament gets disrupted, the first thing that people start calculating is what was the hourly cost of disruption of parliament. And the simplicity of how you arrive at that number just befuddles you. So all you do is take the entire budget of parliament, divide it by the number of days and divide it by the number of hours. You get a permanent value and multiply that by the amount of disruption that happens. And I was talking to a member of parliament, and he said that if disrupting parliament costs X amount of money, three of us can pool together and buy like 10 hours of disruption time. That's the level of debate that we have when it comes to debating the enormity of the things that parliament does. What we don't debate is if parliament gets disrupted, key legislation gets stopped. Right? The women's reservation bill hasn't still passed. The maternity benefit bill, which impacts maternity rights and increases these maternity rights for working women, has been stuck for about 6 months now. Right? All of us know that it's taken a long and arduous journey for the GST bill to come to a certain stage. So first is the scale of debate. What is it that we are debating when it comes to parliament? Are we debating the bigger stuff, or are we debating the small, minuscule stuff about how many free flights do we get? And the thinking about parliament, which is the theme here, the thinking about the institution of parliament has to change. And the thinking has to go to a level where we say, what is it that we can do to make sure that this institution does what it was supposed to. So obviously we need to staff this institution, get it more people, more money, more research. Second, we have to, 65 years, the rules of this institution haven't really changed, right? There are current laws which prevent the institution from doing its job well. That needs to change. And finally, what needs to change is, our own thought process about engaging with the institution. Never have I heard of, somebody going to a member of parliament asking them what their viewpoint on a particular piece of, legislation or debate is. There's a member of parliament who once had to put a plaque outside his house that said that he could not provide LPG connections, because that's what people were coming to him for. LPG connections, transfers, jobs for their kids, school admissions. And this approach of ours of engaging with the institution skews the incentive for that institution. So the debate that we currently have is, I'm going to provide you more jobs, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But that's not what the institution is for. The institution is supposed to do much, much bigger stuff. So I'm going to finally end there, with the hope that in the next 5 years, we are able to see an institution which the Constitution, designed in a certain way, and which we have broken, and if we can rebuild that.